Let me ask you a question that might sound crazy. Can you sign a contract for a miracle? And what happens when that miracle comes with a love story you never, ever saw coming? Many people will tell you that love and business are like oil and water, they just don't mix. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the most transactional, legal-binding agreement a person could ever make, hiring a surrogate, is actually the secret back door to the most profound love of their life? This story starts from a place of deep, aching grief, with a wealthy businessman trying to build a family the only way he knows how, like a corporate merger. It's a raw look at how loneliness can drive us to do extraordinary things. But here is the quick reward for you today. The truth you're about to see unfold: the heart does not care about contracts. In this incredible journey, you'll witness how a relationship that began with ink and paper, governed by the strictest rules, blossomed into an unexpected romance that defied all logic. It's a story that proves a baby brings them together in ways no one could ever anticipate. We're going to explore that razor-thin line between ethics and emotion. Imagine being bound by a legal document that forbids personal connection, yet feeling an undeniable magnetic pull towards the one person you're absolutely not supposed to fall for. This story is a masterclass in forbidden feelings and a true tale of love against the rules. It poses a tough question when your head and your heart are at war. Which one do you follow, especially when a brand new life hangs in the balance? This journey from a cold, hard contract to a deep, soulful connection will challenge everything you think you know about how families are made and how love is found. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things in life happen when you break all the rules. So get comfortable. As we dive in, do me a favor and comment below telling us where you're watching from in the world. Make sure you follow the channel and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that love can truly conquer all. Well, let's talk about Nathan Ward. Picture a man who seemingly has it all: towering skyscraper bearing his name, the kind of wealth that makes headlines, and a mind sharp enough to conquer any boardroom. Yet, in the quiet solitude of his penthouse overlooking the city lights, a profound emptiness echoed. It's a funny thing, isn't it? How you can own the world and still feel like you have nothing. His grief was a silent partner, a shadow that followed him from dawn till dusk, a constant reminder of the love he'd lost. This wasn't just about loneliness, it was about a future that had vanished. You see, for a man like Nathan, legacy is everything. It's not just about the buildings or the stock portfolio, it's about what comes after. He and his late wife had dreamed of filling their home with the laughter of children, a dream that was cruelly cut short. Now that longing had resurfaced, but this time with a desperate edge. It became his new North Star, the one project that money couldn't easily solve, yet the one he needed most for his own healing after loss. He wasn't just looking to have a child, he was trying to rebuild a reason to wake up in the morning. Think about it. When you lose something irreplaceable, your first instinct is to either give up or build something new from the ashes. Nathan chose the latter. He approached fatherhood like one of his business ventures, with meticulous planning and a clear objective. But the heart isn't a spreadsheet, is it? You can't forecast emotions. He imagined a streamlined process, a way to achieve his goal without the messy complexities of human connection. He was about to learn a powerful lesson about how life often forces a heart-over-business reality upon us, whether we're ready or not. His world was one of polished surfaces and predictable outcomes. He could anticipate market trends and competitor moves with uncanny precision. This, however, was uncharted territory. The silence of his massive, art-filled apartment felt heavier. Each day, the potential for joy and chaos conspicuously absent. It's like having a state-of-the-art kitchen, but no one to cook for. Nathan Ward had the perfect stage, but the main actors were missing. This deep-seated need for family was the one variable he couldn't control, and it was driving him toward a decision that would change everything. He thought he was merely seeking a solution, a logical path to fatherhood. The idea of a surrogate love story was the furthest thing from his mind. It wasn't even in the same universe as his intentions. His goal was simple: to hear the pitter-patter of little feet, to have a reason to look forward to the future, to finally start a new chapter. He was a widower finds love again, only in the sense that he was searching for a new purpose to love, a new reason to be. He was setting the stage for a family, but he had no idea what that family would truly look like. And so, with a resolve forged in loss and determination, Nathan Ward began to set the wheels in motion. He believed he was commissioning a service, a straightforward arrangement to bring his child into the world. He was meticulously planning for a baby, but he wasn't at all prepared for the journey of family redefined. He had anticipated every legal and financial detail, but he failed to account for the one element that would dismantle all his carefully constructed walls: the undeniable, unpredictable power of the human heart. So Nathan did what he did best: he strategized. He approached the path to fatherhood through the sterile, yet efficient, doors of a surrogacy agency. It was a world of glossy brochures, hushed tones, and legally binding documents, a world he understood. This agency was the perfect intermediary, a firewall designed to handle the human element so he wouldn't have to. He was, in essence, outsourcing the most intimate of journeys. This initial step was the very definition of the from contract to connection journey, starting firmly with the contract, a document designed to keep connection at bay. It was a business deal, plain and simple. The contract itself was a masterpiece of legal precision, pages upon pages detailing every possible contingency, every financial obligation, every medical protocol. And nestled within the jargon was the most important clause of all: a strict agreement for professional distance. No personal calls, no unnecessary meetings, no emotional entanglement. The rules were clear. This was a preemptive strike against the very idea of a love against the rules scenario. Nathan was setting up the rules, so love could never even be part of the game. He felt a sense of security in these clearly defined boundaries, believing they would protect his heart. On the other side of this agreement was a name in a file, a person he was yet to meet. He didn't know her story, her dreams, or her fears, and the contract ensured it would stay that way. He was the client, she was the surrogate. The roles were as clearly defined as those in his company's organizational chart. This calculated detachment was, he believed, a sign of respect for the arrangement. It was clean, it was professional, and it was, in his mind, the only way this could possibly work without opening old wounds or creating new ones. He was building a fortress of professionalism around a deeply emotional desire. Think of it like commissioning a priceless piece of art. You sign a contract with a gallery. You agree on the price and the delivery date, but you don't necessarily sit down for coffee with the artist every week. Nathan saw this in a similar light. He was the patron of a miracle, but he intended to admire the result from a safe distance. This approach gave him a sense of control in a situation where, deep down, he knew he had very little. It was his way of managing the overwhelming vulnerability of wanting something so badly, the desire for a child that left him wide open. This entire process was a reflection of a man trying to manage grief by imposing order on chaos. Had lost his wife to the unpredictable cruelty of life, so now he was determined to build his family in the most predictable way possible. The agency, the contract, the distant seat was all armor. He was preparing for a surrogate love story in the most literal, non-romantic sense imaginable. He was orchestrating the creation of a child he could love, while ensuring no other messy, complicated love could enter the picture. A perfect plan on paper. But here's the thing about plans, especially the ones involving the creation of a new life: they have a tendency to develop a mind of their own. The ink was dry, the terms were agreed upon, and the process was officially underway. Nathan felt a sense of accomplishment, of having taken a definitive step toward healing after loss. He had built a perfect, sterile container for a miracle. Now all he had to do was wait. He was about to find out, however, that you can't contain a miracle without being changed by it. Now let's pull back the curtain and meet Hannah Sanchez. Her world wasn't one of glass towers and stock tickers. It was a universe of library stacks, late-night study sessions, and the ever-present hum of anxiety over student loan debt. As a dedicated grad student surrogate, she was brilliant, driven, and fighting tooth and nail for her dream of becoming an architectural historian. Her life was a stark contrast to Nathan's, where he measured success in market shares. She measured it in footnotes and final exams. She wasn't looking for a fairy tale, she was looking for a lifeline, a practical solution to a very real problem. The decision to become a surrogate wasn't made lightly. It was born from a pragmatic mind that saw a path to a debt-free future, a way to finally breathe. It was a job, a 9-month commitment that would, in the end, allow her to build the life she envisioned. To her, the man on the other side of the contract was an abstract concept, a name Nathan Ward attached to a generous financial agreement. She hadn't factored in the possibility of an unexpected romance. Her focus was purely on the transaction and the freedom it would buy her. She was strong, independent, and believed she had the emotional fortitude to keep it all separate. Hannah viewed the contract not as a set of restrictions, but as a framework for success. The professional distance suited her just fine. She had her studies to focus on, a dissertation to write, and a future to plan. The pregnancy would be a chapter, a significant and unusual one, but a chapter nonetheless. She was used to discipline, to compartmentalizing her life in order to succeed. She believed this would be no different. She would be a vessel, a temporary guardian, and she would do the job with the same dedication she applied to her academic work. She was building her future, and this was just a very unconventional form of construction. She possessed a quiet resilience that often goes unnoticed in a loud world. It's the kind of strength you see in people who have had to work for everything they have. She wasn't naive about the process. She'd read the books, joined the forums, and understood the potential for emotional complications. She even read books on emotional intelligence, like Daniel Goleman's work, to prepare herself. But she had a powerful motivator: the vision of herself. Walking across a graduation stage, degree in hand, with no financial chains holding her back, this vision was her armor. This journey wasn't about a baby brings them together for her. It was about the baby providing her with the means to stand on her own 2 feet. It was a noble goal, born of ambition and practicality. She saw herself as a partner in a very specific project. She would provide a priceless service, and in return, she would receive the key to unlock her own potential. The arrangement seemed perfectly symmetrical, a fair exchange. She was ready to uphold her end of the bargain with professionalism and grace, seeing it as a unique chapter in her own story of empowerment. And so, with a clear head and a determined heart, Hannah Sanchez signed the papers. She was prepared for the morning sickness, the doctor's appointments, and the physical transformation. She had a plan, a schedule, and a goal. She was stepping into a role that would challenge her body and her time, but she felt certain she could protect her heart. What she hadn't planned for was the man behind the name, or the profound, life-altering connection that was silently waiting to defy every clause in their carefully written contract. Their first few interactions were exactly as the contract dictated: formal, guarded, and utterly professional. They met in the neutral territory of the agency's conference room, the air thick with the unspoken rules of their arrangement. It was a dance of polite nods and carefully chosen words, each of them performing their agreed-upon role. Nathan was the courteous, distant client. Hannah was the composed, professional surrogate. They were 2 strangers linked by a singular, extraordinary goal, yet separated by a chasm of legal and emotional boundaries. It was a fascinating study in ethics and emotion, with the ethics of the contract firmly in the driver's seat. Conversations were a checklist of logistics. The appointment is on Tuesday at 10 a.m. Are you taking the prenatal vitamins? Do you need anything? The questions were practical, the answers concise. There was no room for how are you feeling really, or what are you afraid of. They were navigating the most personal journey imaginable with the impersonal language of a business merger. This structured communication was a shield for both of them, a way to manage the sheer weirdness of their situation. The idea of a heart over business mindset was not even on the table. This was business, period. From Nathan's perspective, this formality was a relief. It was working. He could keep his grief and his burgeoning hope tucked away, safe from any potential complications. He saw Hannah's professionalism as a sign of her strength and reliability, which he deeply respected. He didn't want to burden her with his story, and he assumed she didn't want to share hers. It was easier this way, cleaner. He could focus on the miracle of the growing baby without getting entangled with the person making it possible. He was a widower finds love again only in his growing love for his unborn child. Hannah, for her part, mirrored his professional demeanor perfectly. She was a grad student surrogate who knew how to stick to a syllabus, and this contract was her new syllabus. She provided clear, factual updates, answered his questions respectfully, and never overstepped. She was focused on her responsibilities, both to him and to her own future. She saw their interactions as a necessary part of the job, and she performed her role flawlessly. She was building a wall of professionalism not to be cold, but to protect her own emotional well-being, a strategy she thought was foolproof. You could compare it to two astronauts on a critical mission. They rely on each other completely, their lives and the mission's success intertwined. But their communication is all about procedure and data. It's efficient, necessary, and devoid of personal chatter. Nathan and Hannah were in their own kind of capsule, floating through the first trimester in a state of controlled, professional orbit. Their connection was defined entirely by the child that was beginning to grow, a connection that was, for now, filtered through the thick glass of their agreement. They were both playing their parts to perfection, masters of emotional restraint. The contract was their script, and they were hitting every mark. But a script only dictates the lines, it can't control the subtle glances, the shared moment of awe at the first ultrasound, or the silent, growing respect. They thought they had everything under control, that their formal arrangement was strong enough to hold. They had no idea that the foundation of their carefully constructed wall was about to be shaken by the one thing no contract can ever truly account for: shared human experience. Life, as it so often does, had other plans. It threw a wrench into their perfectly engineered arrangement in the form of a pregnancy twist. Minor complications arose, nothing life-threatening, but enough to require closer monitoring, more frequent doctor's visits, and prescribed rest for Hannah. Suddenly, the sterile distance they had so carefully maintained was no longer possible. The neat boundaries of their contract began to blur, forcing them out of their carefully defined roles and into a shared space of concern and vulnerability. The firewall the agency provided was breached by a simple medical necessity. The formal, scheduled check-ins were replaced by impromptu phone calls and shared waiting rooms. Nathan, driven by a deep-seated fear of loss and an overwhelming sense of responsibility, found himself unable to stay away. He insisted on driving her to appointments, wanting to hear the doctor's updates firsthand. It was no longer about logistics, it was about the well-being of his child and, to his surprise, the well-being of the woman carrying him. This unexpected proximity chipped away at their armor, forcing them to see the person on the other side of the agreement. For the first time, their conversations drifted away from the checklist. Sitting in the quiet hum of a hospital waiting room, silence becomes a different beast. It begs to be filled. They started talking about small things, books, favorite foods, the absurdity of daytime television. He learned about her passion for history, and she saw glimpses of the man behind the CEO persona. This forced togetherness was the beginning of an emotional awakening for both of them, an awakening they were completely unprepared for and actively trying to resist. This wasn't a calculated shift, it was an organic one, born from a shared crisis. A medical crisis bonds people in a way that normal circumstances never can. It strips away the pretense and leaves you with raw, honest humanity. When you're worried about a heartbeat on a monitor, the formalities of a contract seem laughably insignificant. They were no longer just a client and a surrogate. They were two people in a trench together, focused on a single precious goal. Their shared anxiety became an unexpected bridge between their two very different worlds. Think of it like being stuck in an elevator. You get in with a stranger, respecting each other's space. But if that elevator gets stuck, the social rules change. You talk, you share, you form a temporary alliance. Nathan and Hannah were stuck in the elevator of a complicated pregnancy. The professional distance was a luxury they could no longer afford. Every shared look of relief after a good report, every quiet moment of mutual concern, was a brick being laid in the foundation of a new, unforeseen connection. And so, the carefully constructed walls began to crumble, not with a dramatic explosion, but with the slow, persistent erosion of shared time and shared worry. They were spending more time together out of necessity, but it was paving the way for something far more profound. They were still telling themselves this was part of the deal, an adjustment to the plan. But deep down, a new unwritten clause was being added to their story, one that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with a burgeoning, terrifying, and utterly unexpected romance. As they spent more time together, Hannah began to see past the Nathan Ward from the business magazines. She saw the man who held his breath until the doctor found the baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound. She saw the way his shoulders would slump in relief, a silent, unguarded moment that spoke volumes more than his carefully chosen words. Beneath the polished, impenetrable exterior of the corporate titan was a man who was quietly terrified. A man who had lost once and was desperately afraid of losing again. It was a profound revelation. This wasn't the detached, hands-off client she had signed up with. This was a man wrestling with hope and fear in equal measure. She saw it in the way Head called to check if she'd eaten, framing it as concern for the baby, but with an underlying current of genuine care for her. It's like watching a stoic, old-fashioned grandfather. He might not say, "I care about you," but he'll make sure your car has a full tank of gas. Nathan's vulnerability was in his actions, not his words. This glimpse into his soul started to change everything for her. She began to understand the depth of his desire for this child. It wasn't about ego or legacy in the way she had first assumed. It was about healing after loss. It was about filling a void that had been carved into his very being. Seeing his unguarded hope and his quiet grief humanized him completely. The billionaire in the tailored suit faded away, replaced by a man with a wounded heart who was pinning all his hopes on this pregnancy. This new perspective made the idea of a simple, transactional relationship feel increasingly inadequate. Her perception of their arrangement began to shift. It was no longer a job with a clear-cut emotional boundary. How could it be when she was now a keeper of his vulnerability? She was the only one who saw this side of him, the side he kept hidden from his board of directors and the world. This shared secret, this silent acknowledgement of his fear, created a new kind of intimacy between them. It was a connection forged not in romance, but in shared humanity, laying the groundwork for what would become an undeniable surrogate love story. It was in the small moments that the truth revealed itself. The time he showed up at her apartment, with bags of groceries after the doctor ordered bed rest, looking awkward and out of place among her stacks of books. Or the time he confessed, in a low voice in the hospital parking lot, that the scent of antiseptic reminded him of his wife. These weren't the actions of a client. These were the actions of a person letting his guard down, perhaps without even realizing it. Hannah, the ever-practical grad student, found herself in uncharted emotional territory. She had prepared for the physical toll, but not for the profound empathy she was beginning to feel for Nathan Ward. She was seeing the real man, not the myth, and it was complicating everything. She was beginning to care. And that simple fact was a far greater complication than any medical issue the doctors could have warned her about. The story was changing, and she was no longer sure what her role was supposed to be. On the other side of this unexpected equation, Nathan was undergoing his own transformation. He had hired Hannah based on a sterile agency file, good health, stable background, a perfect candidate on paper. He had expected a transaction, but he was getting a revelation. He saw a woman who faced medical scares not with panic, but with a calm, stubborn resolve. He saw her quiet resilience, the uncomplaining way she handled the discomfort and the fear. This wasn't the fragility he might have expected, it was an incredible understated strength. What surprised him most, however, was her humor. Even when confined to bed rest, surrounded by textbooks she needed for a future that felt temporarily on hold, she could crack a dry, witty joke that would slice through the tension in an instant. Her humor wasn't a performance, it was a survival mechanism, a sign of a spirit that refused to be defeated by circumstances. It was in these moments of shared laughter over something absurd that Nathan felt the last of his corporate stiffness melt away. He wasn't just the client anymore, he was a man genuinely enjoying the company of a remarkable woman. He started to see her not as the surrogate, but as Hannah. He was moved by her dedication to her studies, her passion for dusty old buildings and the stories they told. He saw a fighter, a woman determined to build her own life on her own terms. It was a strength so different from his own. His was a power built on wealth and influence. Hers was an internal fortitude that no amount of money could buy. This realization was a key part of his emotional awakening, forcing him to reevaluate his own definitions of strength and success. This growing admiration was completely at odds with the clean, simple arrangement he had wanted. His feelings were a breach of his own contract, a violation of the professional distance he had insisted upon. Yet, he found he couldn't stop it. He was drawn to her spirit, to the core of who she was. The idea that this all started as a business deal was beginning to feel like a distant, almost absurd memory. The lines were blurring into a picture he had never intended to paint, a picture of a heart-over-business reality he was now living in. Think about the difference between buying a house and building a home. He had started this process by buying a house, a contractual arrangement to create a family. But in getting to know Hannah, in witnessing her strength and sharing moments of laughter and fear, he was brick by brick, unintentionally building a home. It was a home built on mutual respect and a burgeoning, deep affection. He had set out to become a father, but he was unexpectedly finding a partner in the truest sense of the word. And so, his carefully constructed world continued to shift. He had been a widower finds love again, only in a conceptual way, seeking to love a child. But now, a new, terrifying, and wonderful possibility was emerging. He was beginning to feel something for Hannah Sanchez, something that felt alarmingly like hope. He was moved by her quiet resilience, captivated by her humor, and deeply in awe of her strength. The contract in his files was becoming obsolete. The real story was being written in the shared glances and quiet moments between them. The dam of formality had been breached, and now the conversations began to flow. The logistical check-ins about appointments and vitamins evolved into real talks about hopes, dreams, and the past. He found himself telling her about his late wife, and not just the grief, but the happy memories, the inside jokes. And she, in turn, shared her passion for architecture, her dreams of traveling to see the great cathedrals of Europe, and the anxieties of a grad student surrogate trying to balance a monumental present with an uncertain future. Their connection was no longer just about the baby they were creating, it was about them. It was a slow, cautious uncovering of two souls who had by chance found a surprising kinship. Headbringer, a book he thought shed-like, something on Roman aqueducts, and they'd end up talking for an hour. Shed text him a funny observation about a historical documentary, and it would spark a conversation that lasted all evening. This deepening bond was the very essence of their journey, from contract to connection. You know, it's like tending to a garden you didn't mean to plant. You drop a few seeds by accident, and at first, you ignore them. But then a few sprouts pop up, and you can't help but give them a little water. Before you know it, you have a full-blown garden that you care about deeply. Nathan and Hannah were watering these accidental seeds of connection with every shared story and every vulnerable admission. Their talks were becoming the highlight of their days, a source of comfort and unexpected joy for both of them. The transition was subtle. It moved from "how are you feeling physically" to "how are you holding up with all this?" The focus shifted from the vessel to the person. For Nathan, this was a monumental step in his emotional awakening. He was connecting with someone on a deeply personal level for the first time since his wife's death. For Hannah, it was equally profound. She was seeing beyond the checkbook and connecting with the man, finding a surprising friend and confidant. In the most unlikely of circumstances, their conversations became a safe harbor. With his business associates, Nathan had to be the unshakable leader. With her academic peers, Hannah had to be the focused student, hiding the extraordinary secret of her pregnancy. But with each other, they could just be Nathan and Hannah. They could be scared, hopeful, tired, and confused without judgment. They were building a unique, private world, a bubble where the strange rules of their situation didn't seem to matter as much. The professional distance was now a distant memory, a joke they could almost share. The contract was still legally binding, but their personal connection had rendered its emotional clauses meaningless. They were far beyond the realm of client and surrogate. They were friends, confidants, partners, and as their conversations grew deeper, a new unspoken question began to hang in the air between them. What exactly was this? And where was it possibly going? And then came the fight. Not a fight with each other, but a brutal, internal battle within themselves. The shift from professional respect to deep personal affection hadn't gone unnoticed by either Nathan or Hannah. It was a beautiful, terrifying development that threw everything into chaos. This was the moment where the full weight of ethics and emotion crashed down upon them. Their arrangement had been built on a clear ethical framework of business transaction, but their emotions were staging a hostile takeover, and they were both terrified of the consequences. Nathan found himself in a state of profound conflict. How could he be developing feelings for the woman carrying his child? It felt like a betrayal on multiple levels, a betrayal of the professional agreement, a betrayal of his late wife's memory, and a potential exploitation of the power dynamic between them. He was the wealthy benefactor, she was the student he was paying. The ethics of the situation were a tangled mess, and it was a clear case of love against the rules he himself had written. He would pull back, become distant for a day or two, only to find himself drawn back by an undeniable pull. Hannah's struggle was just as intense. She was growing to care deeply for Nathan, but she was also keenly aware of her role. Was this real affection, or was it some form of Stockholm Syndrome, a pregnancy brain hormonal illusion? She questioned her own heart, wondering if she was just bonding with the man who was the father of the baby she was carrying. The baby that contractually wasn't hers to love. The idea of a family redefined was starting to form in her mind, but it was a terrifying, forbidden thought. She was the surrogate. That was her job. Falling for the client wasn't in the job description. This internal conflict created a strange, new tension between them. There were moments of intense connection, a shared laugh, a lingering glance followed by awkward retreats into formality. It was a dance of approach and avoidance, of wanting to close the distance and being terrified of what would happen if they did. They were both afraid. Afraid of getting hurt, afraid of complicating an already complex situation, and afraid of what this meant for the future, for the baby, and for themselves. It was an unexpected romance that felt both incredibly right and fundamentally wrong. Think of it as walking a tightrope. On one side is the safety of the contract and the clearly defined roles. On the other side is a profound developing love. They were both trying to keep their balance in the middle, but the rope was swaying violently with every beat of their conflicted hearts. Every deep conversation, every moment of shared vulnerability, was another gust of wind threatening to send them tumbling into the unknown, so they fought it. They tried to reinforce the old boundaries, to remind themselves that this was a temporary arrangement with a clear end date. But it was like trying to unring a bell. They had seen too much, shared too much. The connection was already there, a living, breathing thing between them. They were both caught in a riptide of emotion, and the harder they fought to swim back to the safety of the shore, the further out to sea they were pulled. The question was no longer if the boundaries would break, but when. Amidst her turmoil, over her feelings for Nathan, another, even more primal connection was growing: her bond with the baby. At first, it was an abstract concept, a job she was doing. But now, it was a tangible reality. It was the flutter of the first kick, a secret language only she could feel. It was the hiccuping rhythm against her ribs in the middle of the night. This tiny, growing person was becoming real to her, and with that reality came an overwhelming, unexpected wave of affection. This was the part the contract could never, ever cover. This bond threw her role into even sharper question. The agreement was clear: she was the surrogate, not the mother. Her emotional role was supposed to be one of benevolent detachment. But how can you remain detached from a life that is literally a part of you? Every kick and every turn was a reminder that her connection to this child was becoming deeply personal. The thought of handing him over, which had once been a straightforward, logical endpoint, now sent a pang of something sharp and painful through her heart. She began to question everything. Was it possible to carry a child for 9 months and not fall in love? The forums and books she'd read had warned her about this, but reading about a storm is very different from standing in the middle of it. For a practical, logical person like Hannah, this emotional deluge was disorienting. She was a grad student surrogate who was suddenly failing the most important test of all: maintaining emotional distance. Her heart was breaking the rules her head had agreed to. This growing bond with the baby was inextricably linked to her feelings for Nathan. She would catch herself daydreaming, not just about the baby, but about the three of them. A family redefined in the most radical way imaginable. She would see Nathan's face filled with such gentle hope when he talked to her belly, and her heart would ache with a confusing mix of joy and sorrow. She was witnessing the birth of a family that she was, by definition, not supposed to be a part of. The idea that a baby brings them together was becoming a beautiful and agonizing truth. It's a classic head versus shirt battle, isn't it? It's like an undercover agent who spends so much time with the target that they start to sympathize, to care, to forget which side they're on. Hannah's heart was going native, completely forgetting its original mission of detachment. She was supposed to be the architect's assistant, helping to build a home for someone else. But now she found herself wanting to live in it. This internal crisis was reaching its peak. She was bonding deeply with the child, and she was falling for the father. The neat, clean lines of her role had dissolved into a messy, beautiful, and heartbreaking masterpiece she didn't know how to navigate. She was no longer just the surrogate. She felt like a mother, a partner, a part of something whole. And as the due date drew closer, she had no idea how she was going to walk away, or if she even wanted to anymore. Nathan's own carefully planned future was also starting to look completely different in his mind's eye. His original vision was a simple one, just him and his child. A loving father, a happy baby, a quiet life rebuilt from the ashes of his grief. It was a solitary picture, a continuation of his legacy. But now, he couldn't picture it that way anymore. Whenever he imagined bringing the baby home, his mind would automatically, stubbornly, add Hannah to the scene. He saw her laughing on the living room floor with the child, her books scattered on his minimalist coffee table. This new vision was both wonderful and terrifying. He was a man who planned everything, from corporate takeovers to his weekend schedule. This spontaneous, heartfelt reimagining of his future was completely out of character. He had started this journey to become a father. A widower finds love again in the purest sense of loving his new child. He had never, ever factored in the possibility of finding a new partner, a new love. And yet, here she was, the star of a future he hadn't planned but now desperately wanted. The idea of a family redefined took on a whole new meaning for him. It wasn't just about a single father and his child anymore. It was about creating something new, something born from the most unlikely of circumstances. It was the possibility of a home filled not just with the joy of a new baby, but with the warmth of a partnership, with intellectual debate, with inside jokes, with the quiet comfort of having someone to share the small moments with. He was starting to imagine a family built not on a past dream, but on a present, startlingly real connection. His emotional awakening was now complete. He was no longer just feeling admiration or affection for Hannah, he was falling in love with her. And with that love came the undeniable desire to build a life with her. The thought of their arrangement ending, of her walking out of the hospital and out of his life after the baby was born, was now unbearable. It felt like a surgical amputation of a part of himself he had only just discovered. The from contract to connection journey had reached a destination he never knew he was looking for. It's like planning a trip to the mountains and somehow ending up at the most beautiful beach you've ever seen. You weren't prepared for it, you don't have the right clothes, but you can't imagine ever wanting to leave. Nathan had packed for the solitary mountains of fatherhood, but he had stumbled upon the warm, sunlit shores of a life with Hannah. The logic of his original plan paled in comparison to the emotional truth of what he now wanted. He began to subtly test the waters, his conversation shifting from the baby to our baby, a slip of the tongue that was no slip at all. He was starting to imagine a future where the story wasn't just about him and his child, but about them. He had no idea if she felt the same, if she could ever see him as more than the client, the man who had hired her. He was standing on the precipice of a confession, waiting for the right moment, unaware that their carefully managed timeline was about to be thrown into chaos. The air between them was thick with unspoken feelings. The "what are we?" question was a silent, pulsing presence in every room they shared. They were on the verge of acknowledging this beautiful, terrifying thing that had grown between them. Nathan was building up the courage to confess his heart, and Hannah was wrestling with her own flood of emotions. And right at that critical moment, just as they were about to step off the tightrope, life intervened with the ultimate pregnancy twist. Hannah went into early labor. 1 minute, they were sharing a quiet evening, the silence comfortable and charged with meaning. The next, a sharp gasp from Hannah, a look of shocked realization, and the world dissolved into a blur of controlled panic. The slow, simmering romance was violently interrupted by the stark, immediate reality of childbirth. There was no more time for gentle confessions or hesitant questions. The baby was coming, ready or not, and their own emotional timeline was rendered instantly irrelevant. All the unresolved tension, the fear, the hope, the love, it was all shoved into a hospital go bag alongside spare clothes and a toothbrush. The drive to the hospital was a frantic, surreal bubble of time. Nathan, who could command a boardroom of executives with unshakable calm, found his hands trembling on the steering wheel. Hannah, the strong, resilient woman who had faced everything, with quiet grace, was now breathing through waves of pain, her vulnerability laid bare. They were stripped of all their roles: CEO, grad student, and reduced to two terrified, hopeful people on the brink of a miracle. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. In their minds, there would have been a conversation, a moment of clarity, before the birth. But the baby had other plans. It was as if this child was determined to force the issue, to bring everything to a head in the most dramatic way possible. The theoretical family redefined was about to become a loud, messy, and beautiful reality in a sterile hospital room. The slow burn of their love story had just been thrown into a flash fire. The half-formed confessions and tentative hopes would have to wait. The focus snapped with laser-like intensity onto the immediate crisis: getting to the hospital, getting through the delivery, and ensuring the safety of both Hannah and the baby. The love against the rules they had been grappling with was now a secondary concern to the primal, urgent rules of labor and birth. It was a stark reminder that they were not, and had never been, in control of this journey. As the hospital doors swished open, they entered a new phase of their story. The quiet, internal struggle was over, replaced by a loud, external one. They were about to face the most intense moments of their lives, not as client and surrogate, and not yet as declared lovers, but as something in between: partners, thrown into the fire together. Everything they had been feeling was about to be tested in the crucible of the delivery room. The sterile, fluorescent-lit environment of the hospital became their new world. The slow, romantic tension was replaced by the urgent beeping of monitors and the calm, commanding voices of doctors and nurses. And in this pressure cooker, decisions had to be made fast. The early labor presented complications, and suddenly the legal contract seemed like a flimsy piece of paper in the face of life or death. Choices, the carefully separated worlds of ethics and emotion, collided with the force of a car crash. The doctors, unaware of their unique arrangement, looked to Nathan for decisions about Hannah's care, and to Hannah for choices about the baby. But Nathan and Hannah only looked to each other. In that crucible of crisis, the lines of client and surrogate completely evaporated. He wasn't thinking about his financial investment, he was terrified for the woman he loved. She wasn't thinking about her contractual obligations, she was worried about the baby and the man, whose heart was breaking with fear in the corner of the room. A medical crisis bonds people in the most profound way, and they were being fused together by fear and hope. Who was her next of kin? Who had the right to make medical decisions? The contract had clauses for this, of course, but the reality was far messier. Nathan found himself fiercely protective, not just of his child, but of Hannah. When a nurse referred to him as the father and to her as the surrogate, he corrected them without thinking, "We're in this together." It was a simple statement, but it was a declaration. It was the moment the hard-over business philosophy won, definitively and forever. The choices they faced were immense. Decisions about medical interventions for her, potential risks for the child-every question from a doctor forced them to confront their new reality. They were a unit, a team. They made decisions together, their hands finding each other in the chaos, a silent acknowledgement that they would get through this as one. The crisis forced them to act as the family they had only just begun to imagine being. There was no time for doubt or hesitation, there was only instinct. And their instincts told them to lean on each other. Think of it as a storm at sea. The captain and the first mate might have their designated roles, but when the ship is going down, they work together to save everyone, themselves included. The hierarchy is gone. There's only the shared goal of survival. In that hospital room, Nathan and Hannah were fighting to get their small family safely to shore. Their future, which had been a hazy romantic dream just hours before, was now being forged in the heat of a medical emergency. Every decision was a thread, weaving them more tightly together. They were no longer just imagining a family redefined. They were living it in real time under the most stressful conditions imaginable. The questions they faced were not just about medical procedures, they were about their future. What happens after this? What are we to each other? The answers weren't spoken, but they were there in every shared glance, every reassuring touch. Their future was being decided not with a conversation, but with action. After hours that stretched into an eternity, the storm finally broke. A final push, a gasp of effort from Hannah, and then the most beautiful sound in the world, the first healthy cry of a newborn baby. The tension that had held the room captive shattered into a million pieces of overwhelming relief. The baby was safe. Hannah, exhausted but lucid, was safe. The crisis was over. But as they looked at each other over the tiny, bundled miracle, they both knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment the nurse placed the baby in Nathan's arms, his world tilted on its axis. He looked at his son, this perfect little being he had longed for, and then his eyes found Hannah's across the room. In her tired, smiling face, he saw not a surrogate, not a business partner, but the mother of his child, his hero, the woman who had brought light back into his life. The professional contract was now a relic of a former life, an artifact from a story that was no longer theirs. The journey from contract to connection was officially complete. Everything had changed. The power dynamic, the emotional distance, the carefully constructed role of it had been burned away in the fire of the delivery. What was left was something raw, pure, and undeniable. As Hannah watched Nathan hold their son, her heart didn't feel the pang of loss she had feared. Instead, it swelled with a profound, peaceful sense of rightness. This wasn't an ending, a transaction completed. It felt like a beginning. It was the ultimate proof that a baby brings them together in the most powerful way imaginable. The hospital room, once a place of fear and crisis, now felt like a sacred space. It was the birthplace of their child, and also the birthplace of their new family. The unspoken feelings, the questions that had been interrupted by labor, now seemed to have answered themselves. You don't go through a battle like that with someone and simply walk away. The shared experience had bonded them with a permanence that no legal document could ever dictate or undo. This was their emotional awakening, crystallized into a single, perfect moment. It's like surviving a shipwreck and washing up on a deserted island together. The old world, with its rules and social structures, is gone. You have to build a new one, just the two of you. Nathan and Hannah had washed up on the shores of parenthood, and the old world of their contract was a distant memory. They had to decide what to build now, but looking at the baby and then at each other, the blueprint seemed obvious. The air was no longer filled with tension, but with a quiet, exhausted, and deeply joyful certainty. The baby was here, they were safe, and they were together. The roles of client and surrogate were gone, shed like old skin. In their place stood a man, a woman, and a child, a family. But one final piece was missing, one thing that needed to be said out loud to make it all real. Everything had changed, but the most important change was yet to be spoken. Later, in the quiet hum of the hospital room, with their son sleeping peacefully in a bassinet nearby, Nathan finally found the words. He pulled a chair close to Hannah's bed, took her hand, and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before, completely open, completely vulnerable. He told her he had been terrified, not just for the baby, but for her. He told her that her strength, her humor, and her incredible spirit had completely captivated him. And then, he said the words that would change their lives forever. He confessed he had fallen in love with her. He was quick to add, his voice thick with emotion, that this wasn't about gratitude. It wasn't an obligation because she had given him a son. It wasn't a transaction where he now owed her his heart. He explained that he had fallen in love with Hannah, the brilliant, funny, Resilient woman who argued with him about history and who faced her fears with a quiet courage he could only dream of possessing. It was a love born not of obligation, but of pure, unadulterated admiration. This was the culmination of his emotional awakening. The final wall around his heart, the one he had built so carefully after his wife's death, came tumbling down. He laid his soul bare, admitting that the family he had started to imagine one with her in it was the only future he wanted. It was a confession that rewrote their entire story, reframing it from a business arrangement into an unexpected romance that had been hiding in plain sight all along. For Hannah, hearing those words was like the final piece of a complex puzzle clicking into place. All the confusing feelings, the questions about her own heart, the bond she felt, it all made sense now. The love she felt for him wasn't a hormonal illusion or a side effect of the situation. It was real, and it was reciprocated. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or confusion. They were tears of profound, overwhelming relief and joy. The surrogate love story had turned out to be a real love story. It's one thing to feel something, but it's another thing entirely to hear it spoken aloud, to have it validated. Nathan's confession wasn't just a declaration of love, it was an affirmation of everything they had become to each other. It honored their journey, from the awkward, formal meetings to this sacred moment in the hospital room. He wasn't just a widower finds love again, he was a man who had found a completely new and different kind of love, one he never expected. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes, waiting for her response. He had taken the ultimate leap of faith, defying the contract, the ethics, and his own fears to speak his truth. He had laid his heart on the line, not knowing if she would, or even could, accept it. The future of their newly formed family rested on her answer, hanging suspended in the quiet, hopeful air of the hospital room. With a smile that outshone all the exhaustion on her face, Hannah squeezed his hand. She told him, her voice soft but sure, that she had fallen in love with him too. She confessed her own internal battle, her fear that her feelings were just a product of the circumstances. But seeing him with their son, hearing his confession, she knew with every fiber of her being that her love was real. She had seen his heart, his vulnerability, his goodness. She accepted his love, and she offered her own in return, freely and completely. In that moment, the last vestiges of their old roles were gone forever. They were not client and surrogate. They were Nathan and Hannah. They were partners, lovers, and parents. It was the final triumphant step in their journey, from contract to connection. The contract was a piece of paper. What they had now was a bond forged in shared fear, mutual respect, and profound love. They had done the impossible. They had found a pure, authentic love in the most manufactured of circumstances. Together, they looked at their son, the tiny person who had brought them together, the catalyst for this incredible transformation. The phrase "baby brings them together" seemed like the understatement of the century. This child hadn't just brought them into the same room, he had brought them into the same life, the same future. Their journey was a testament to the idea that love doesn't follow rules or contracts. It grows where it's least expected, often in defiance of all logic. It was the ultimate victory of heart over business. Their future wouldn't be simple. They would have to navigate the reactions of the outside world, explain their unique story, and merge their two vastly different lives. But for the first time, none of that mattered. They had each other, and they had their son. They had found their way through the maze of ethics and emotion and emerged on the other side, hand in hand. Their life would be a constant process of family redefined, creating their own rules, their own traditions, their own unique and beautiful story. Think of it as the end of one book and the beginning of another. The first book was a legal thriller, full of clauses and conflicts. But this new book, the one they were about to write together, was an epic love story. The prologue was tense and uncertain, But the first chapter was beginning here, in this quiet hospital room, with a declaration of love and the promise of a shared life. A love born unexpectedly had found its home, and so they began. Not as a client and his surrogate, not as a lonely widower and a struggling student. They left the hospital a few days later as a family. A slightly unconventional, completely unexpected, and absolutely real family. They walked out into the sunlight, together, ready to start their life, proving that sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that start with a signature on a dotted line and end with a hand to hold for a lifetime. And so, a story that began as a sterile business transaction ends as a family built on pure, undeniable love. The journey of Nathan and Hannah is such a powerful testament to the fact that the heart rarely follows the rules we set for it. It's the ultimate narrative of going from contract to connection, a beautiful example of a family redefined. What an incredible, unexpected romance. It really makes you think about how little control we truly have when it comes to who we love. Their story is more than just a romance. It's a profound reminder for all of us that the greatest joys in life often come from the journeys we never planned to take. It teaches us that vulnerability isn't a weakness, and that sometimes losing control is the only way to find what you were truly meant for. It forces us to ask ourselves, are we open to the unexpected? Or are we letting our own contracts and plans prevent us from finding a happiness we can't yet imagine? I'm so curious to hear your thoughts. What part of their story impacted you the most? Did you expect this ending, or were you hoping for a different twist? Let me know everything in the comments below. If their story touched your heart, please give this video a like. It truly helps the channel, and share it with someone who appreciates seeing love win against all odds. Most importantly, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into stories that change the way we see the world.